You are not failing to get what you want because you don't want it enough. Sit with that for a second, because if it were true, if wanting harder was the answer, you would have gotten there already. You have wanted this thing with everything in you. You have prayed for it, planned for it, lost sleep over it, and still, it hasn't come. So maybe the problem was never how much you wanted it. Maybe the problem is what you've been doing with all that wanting. This video is about a strange, quiet truth that most people never hear, because it doesn't sound like advice. It sounds like the opposite of advice. It's about why the very act of chasing something can be the exact thing that keeps it out of reach, and why the people who seem to receive things easily are usually doing something you've never been taught to do. We're not going to talk about hustle. We're not going to talk about manifestation boards or affirmations in the mirror. We're going to talk about something older and simpler than all of that. Something to do with the space inside you and what you filled it with. Here's the struggle, and I think you already know it even if you've never said it out loud. You want something, a relationship, a level of peace, a version of your life that feels like it fits you, and you go after it. You grip it. You think about it constantly. You measure your days by whether you're closer to it or further away, and the tighter you hold on, the more it seems to slip. You've probably noticed this pattern show up more than once. The job you wanted badly, you didn't get, and the one you weren't even trying for, you did. The person who left when you begged them to stay, and the peace that only showed up the day you finally stopped fighting for it. It looks like coincidence. It isn't. There's a mechanism underneath it, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The room that's already full. Imagine a room, and you're standing in it holding a box. You want someone to hand you something new, a gift, an answer, a way forward. But your hands are already full. Full of worry, full of old outcomes you're still replaying, full of a version of the future you've built so carefully in your mind that there's no room left for anything to actually arrive. This is the first layer of the teaching, and it's the one most people skip past because it sounds too simple to be true. You cannot receive into a space that is already occupied, not because the universe is stingy, because you are full. Most of us think wanting is empty-handed. It isn't. Wanting, the way most of us do it, is one of the most crowded states a person can be in. It's loud, it's busy, it's constantly rehearsing, and a mind that busy has no silence left in it to notice when the thing it was asking for actually walks through the door. Think about your own hands for a second. Not literally. Think about what you're carrying right now, today, into every conversation, every quiet moment, every time you lie down at night hoping sleep will come. There's the worry about whether this thing you want will actually happen. There's the replay of the last time it didn't happen, and the story you built around that failure, the one that says, maybe you're not the kind of person these things happen for. There's the picture of the future you've been sketching for months. So detailed you can practically touch it. So specific that anything less than that exact picture starts to feel like disappointment before it's even had the chance to arrive. All of that is weight. All of that is occupying space. And here is the part that stings a little. None of it is making the thing more likely to come. It's just making you more tired while you wait for it. Picture two people standing in the exact same room, waiting for the exact same door to open. One of them is gripping a box so tightly their knuckles are white, straining toward the door, watching it every second, flinching every time it doesn't move. The other is standing loosely, breathing, present, hands open at their sides. When that door finally opens, which one looks more ready to receive whatever comes through it? Which one has room? This is not a metaphor about giving up or not caring. It's a metaphor about what caring has quietly turned into for most of us. We were never taught that wanting could be soft. We were taught that wanting means gripping, means holding on so hard that letting go of the grip would feel like letting go of the want itself. But a hand that never opens can never receive anything new. It can only keep holding what it already has, which, if you're honest, is usually just the tension itself. There's a reason this idea sounds almost insulting the first time you hear it. It suggests that the block was never out there. It was never the timing, never the other person, never the economy, never the luck. The block was the fullness. And fullness is something you can actually see, if you're willing to look. Notice the running commentary in your head about the thing you want. Notice how much of your day gets spent rehearsing conversations that haven't happened, defending yourself against criticism nobody's given yet, planning your reaction to outcomes that haven't occurred. That's not preparation. That's occupancy. You have filled the very room you were hoping something would walk into. Consider how this shows up in ordinary places. Someone wants a certain kind of love, and so every interaction becomes an audition. Are they the one? Is this leading somewhere? Am I wasting my time? The mind is so busy auditioning that it can't actually meet the person standing in front of it. Someone wants a certain kind of success, and every day becomes measured against a finish line that keeps moving. So even good news gets swallowed by the noise of, but is it enough yet? The room stays full. The door might open 100 times, and each time there's no space for what comes through it to actually land, because every available inch was already taken up by the wanting itself. Here's what makes this different from just another self-help idea about staying positive. This isn't about thinking happy thoughts to trick the door into opening faster. It's about honestly recognizing that your inner space has a kind of physics to it. Just like a cup that's already full cannot hold more water no matter how good the water is, a mind that's already full of anxious rehearsal cannot hold something new no matter how good that new thing is. You could stand right in front of the exact opportunity you've been asking for, and your fullness would make you miss it, misread it, or push it away out of sheer reflexive tension. This is why some people seem to have things come easily to them, and it drives everyone else a little crazy, because it looks unfair. It isn't unfair. It isn't luck either, not in the way we usually mean luck. It's usually just this. They aren't standing there with their hands so full that there's no room left for the gift to land. They've somehow, whether they know it or not, kept some space open. And space, more than any strategy, is what actually allows something to be received. So before anything else in this teaching, before any technique or shift in mindset, the very first thing worth asking yourself is simple. What are you currently holding? Not what do you want. You already know that answer. You've known it for a long time. The real question is, what's in your hands right now, keeping them from being free enough to receive it? Is it worry? Is it a story about the past? Is it a picture of the future, so rigid that anything else would feel like failure? You don't have to fix this today. You don't have to somehow force your hands empty through willpower, because that usually just creates a new kind of gripping onto being empty, the same way you were gripping onto the want. All that's being asked here is that you notice. Notice the fullness. Notice the noise. Notice how much of your inner room is already occupied by things that have nothing to do with the actual gift you're hoping will arrive. That noticing, small as it sounds, is the beginning of everything else this teaching is going to unfold, because you cannot let go of a grip you don't know you have. And once you see how full your hands really are, you start to understand why the door has felt so hard to walk through, not because it was locked, but because there was no room on your side of it for anything to come in. What silence actually does. There's a kind of silence that isn't the absence of sound, it's the absence of grabbing. Think about the last time you truly relaxed. Not sleep, not distraction, but a moment where you simply were. without needing the next 5 minutes to go a certain way. In that moment, something in you opened. You weren't doing anything to make it happen. It happened because you stopped doing. This is uncomfortable to hear if you've built your whole life around effort. We are taught that effort is virtue, that stillness is laziness, that if you're not gripping something, you must not care. But there is a difference between care and clutching. Care is warm, clutching is cold, even when it looks passionate. Clutching is fear, wearing the costume of desire. The people who seem to receive things, love, opportunity, ease, are not people who want less. They are people who have made peace with the empty space inside them, instead of trying to fill it every second with more wanting. Let's slow down on that word, silence, because most people hear it and think of a library or a meditation cushion or somewhere far away from real life. That's not what's being pointed to here. This silence can exist in the middle of a busy street, in a crowded room, in the middle of a hard conversation. It has nothing to do with how much sound is around you. It has to do with whether something inside you has stopped reaching. Reaching is exhausting, even when you don't notice it anymore, because you've been doing it so long it feels normal. Reaching is the low hum of not yet, not yet, not yet, running under everything you do. It's checking the phone one more time. It's replaying what you should have said. It's already rehearsing what you'll say next time. All of that is a kind of noise, even if it never leaves your own head, even if no one around you can hear it. Now think about the opposite. A moment, maybe rare, maybe brief, where none of that reaching was happening. Maybe you were watching a sunset, and for a few seconds, you weren't thinking about anything at all. Maybe you were laughing so hard with someone that the thought of the future simply wasn't present. In that gap, something in you actually opened. Not because you tried to open it, because the reaching stopped. And when reaching stops, space appears on its own, the way a fist naturally opens once it finally stops trying to hold something. This is the part that confuses people, because we've been taught the opposite our whole lives. We've been taught that good things come to those who push, who hustle, who never stop trying. And there's truth buried somewhere in that. Action matters. Effort matters. But there's a difference between effort that flows from being at peace and effort that's actually a disguised panic. The second kind of effort looks like commitment from the outside, but underneath it is just fear, dressed up so it doesn't have to admit what it is. Clutching is cold, even when it looks like passion. Think about someone who says they love something so much they can't stop thinking about it, can't relax until it's secured, can't breathe until it's confirmed. That doesn't sound like warmth. That sounds like fear wearing desire's clothing. Real care doesn't need to strangle the thing it's caring about. It can hold it loosely, the way you'd hold something fragile and precious, firm enough to keep it safe, gentle enough not to crush it. This is why the people who seem to receive things easily are rarely the ones trying the hardest, in the way we usually picture trying. They're not lazy. Often, they're deeply engaged, deeply present, doing the work in front of them. But there's a difference between doing the work and gripping the outcome. They've somehow found a way to do the first without collapsing into the second. And that difference, subtle as it looks from the outside, changes everything about how life responds to them. Silence, in this sense, is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It's something you return to, again and again. Every time you notice the grabbing has started again. You'll grab. Everyone does. The point isn't to never grab again. That's an unrealistic standard that will only make you feel like you're failing at this too. The point is to notice when you're grabbing, and in the noticing, loosen just slightly. That loosening is the silence. It doesn't require you to go anywhere or do anything special. It's available the instant you stop needing this moment to be different than it is. Consider how differently a day unfolds when you carry this kind of quiet underneath everything you do versus when you don't. Same tasks, same conversations, same waiting for the same outcomes. But one version of you is gripped the entire time, and the other version of you is doing exactly the same things with open hands. The tasks get done either way, but only one version of you is actually available to notice what's happening around you, to catch the quiet signals, to respond instead of react. This silence also changes how you're experienced by others, even if they can't name why. People can feel the difference between someone who's talking to them because they're actually present and someone who's talking to them while secretly reaching for something else: approval, validation, an outcome. The first feels like connection. The second feels like being used, even if it's subtle, even if the person doing it doesn't mean any harm. Silence, real silence, is what lets you actually meet another person, or an opportunity, or a moment, instead of just using it to fill the hole underneath your own reaching. None of this asks you to stop wanting things. It only asks you to notice the quality of the wanting. Is it loud? Is it grabbing? Is it running? That constant hum of not yet, not yet. Or has some space opened up underneath it? Some quiet that doesn't need this particular moment to hurry up and prove itself. That space, small as it may feel at first, is where everything else in this teaching begins to make sense. Because it's only from that space that you can actually receive anything at all. The trap of the next thing. Here's something almost nobody says clearly. The moment you get what you want, if nothing inside you has changed, you will immediately want the next thing. You know this. You've lived it. The raise didn't fix it. The relationship didn't fix it. The move to the new city, the new body, the new title. None of it fixed the actual ache, because the ache was never about the thing. The ache was about a silence you didn't know how to sit inside, so you kept feeding it objects instead. This is why so many people who have everything still seem hollow, and why some people who have very little seem to glow with something you can't quite name. It was never about the amount. It was about whether the wanting was covering up an emptiness or arising from a fullness. Think back to something you wanted badly, something you finally got. Remember the day it happened, the relief, the excitement, maybe even a kind of disbelief that it was finally real. And now think about how long that feeling actually lasted. A day, a week, if you were lucky. And then, almost without you noticing, your mind was already circling the next thing, the next milestone, the next thing that was supposedly going to be the one that finally settled it. This is not a personal failing. This is what happens to almost everyone, because most of us were never taught to ask what the wanting was actually for. We assumed the object itself was the destination. We assumed once we had it, the wanting would stop, the ache would quiet, the internal noise would finally go silent. And then we got it, and the noise didn't stop. It just changed its target. This is one of the cruelest tricks the mind plays on us, because it makes us believe the problem is always one step ahead. If only I had this, then I'd be at peace. And then you get it, and somehow peace is still one step ahead. If only I had that other thing. The horizon keeps moving, not because life is cruel, but because the ache was never actually about any specific object. It was about an inner emptiness that never got addressed directly. It only got temporarily distracted. Look at people who seem to have accumulated everything a person could want: wealth, recognition, relationships, freedom of choice. And yet so many of them describe a persistent hollow feeling underneath it all, a sense that something is still missing even though, by every external measure, nothing should be. This isn't because success is meaningless. It's because success was never designed to fill the particular hole they were trying to fill with it. You cannot use an external achievement to patch an internal absence. It's like trying to fix a leak in one room, by painting the walls of a completely different room. The paint might look nice, but the water is still coming in somewhere else. On the other hand, think about people who have very little in the way of possessions or status, and yet there's something almost luminous about them. They're not chasing the next thing with that same frantic energy. They seem, somehow, settled, not passive, not resigned, but genuinely at ease with where they are, even while still moving toward things they care about. What's the difference? It's rarely about how much they have. It's about whether their wanting comes from an attempt to fill an emptiness, or whether it flows from an already existing fullness. Wanting from emptiness is desperate, even when it's quiet. It says, "I am incomplete until I get this." Wanting from fullness is different. It says, "I already have enough to be at peace," and this would simply add to something that was already whole. These two kinds of wanting can look identical from the outside. The same goals, the same effort, sometimes even the same words used to describe them. But they feel entirely different from the inside, and they produce entirely different results. Because the person wanting from fullness isn't broadcasting desperation into every interaction, every negotiation, every relationship. And desperation, whether we like to admit it or not, changes how the world responds to us. This is why chasing the next thing rarely brings the relief you expect, even when you succeed. Success, built on top of an unaddressed inner emptiness, is like building a second story onto a house with a cracked foundation. It might look impressive from the street, but the crack is still there, and it will eventually show up again, usually in a new disguise, a new want, a new goal, a new thing that supposedly will be the one that finally settles it. The way out of this trap isn't to stop wanting things. It's not about becoming a person who no longer cares about achievement or connection or growth. It's about being honest with yourself about what the wanting is actually for. Next time you notice yourself chasing something with that familiar urgency, pause and ask, is this coming from curiosity and genuine desire, or is this coming from a hope that finally, this time, the ache underneath everything will go quiet? That question alone, asked honestly, can start to loosen the trap, because it brings awareness to something that usually runs completely on autopilot. This doesn't mean you'll instantly stop wanting the next thing the moment you achieve the current one. Old patterns don't dissolve just because you've named them, but naming them is the beginning of no longer being run by them blindly. Over time, as you keep noticing this pattern, the moving horizon, the temporary relief, the quiet return of the ache, you start to realize that no external achievement was ever going to be the final one. And in that realization, something begins to shift. Not because you've given up on wanting things, but because you've stopped expecting those things to do a job they were never capable of doing in the first place. Two kinds of wanting. There are two ways to want something, and they look almost identical from the outside, but they feel completely different from the inside. One kind of wanting is a hole trying to fill itself. It's frantic. It checks the phone every 5 minutes. It rehearses conversations that haven't happened yet. It cannot rest, because resting feels like losing ground. The other kind of wanting is more like sunlight reaching toward a window. It's warm, it's real, it moves toward the thing. But if the window is closed today, it doesn't collapse, it waits. It knows tomorrow the light will still be there, whether or not this particular room lets it in. The first kind exhausts you and repels the very thing it's chasing, because desperation has a scent, and people, and life itself, pull away from it. The second kind draws things closer, quietly, without asking permission. You already know which kind you've been practicing. Most of us learned the first kind early, because we were rewarded for anxious effort. and never taught the second kind existed. Let's stay with the first kind for a moment, because it's important to actually understand its texture rather than just label it as bad. This kind of wanting comes from a hole, an internal sense of lack that feels urgent, almost like hunger. And like real hunger, it doesn't wait patiently. It demands. It checks. It refreshes the page one more time, even though nothing has changed since the last refresh 30 seconds ago. It rehearses conversations that may never even happen, building entire arguments in the shower, in the car, in bed at night, all in service of trying to control an outcome that hasn't occurred yet. This kind of wanting cannot rest, because in its own internal logic, resting feels dangerous. If I stop pushing, it seems to think, the thing will slip away. If I stop checking, I'll miss my chance. If I stop rehearsing, I won't be ready. So it keeps running, exhausting itself, convinced that the exhaustion is proof of commitment, when really, it's just proof of fear. And here's the tragic irony. This kind of wanting almost always pushes away the very thing it's chasing. Think about it in the most obvious example. Someone deeply anxious to be liked, who checks constantly for approval, who can feel their need radiating outward in every interaction. Most people, even if they can't articulate why, instinctively pull back from that energy. It's not that the anxious person is unlikable, it's that the sheer intensity of the need creates a kind of pressure that makes closeness feel unsafe. The same is true in almost every other area of life. Job interviews, negotiations, even the way opportunities seem to sense when someone is too desperate and slip quietly away. Now consider the second kind of wanting, the one likened to sunlight reaching toward a window. This wanting is not passive. Sunlight actually moves, actually reaches, actually presses against the glass with real warmth and real intention. But if the window happens to be closed today, the sunlight doesn't panic. It doesn't collapse into despair or start clawing at the glass. It simply continues being what it is, trusting that tomorrow the light will still be there, whether or not this particular window opens. This is a wanting that has patience built into its very structure, not gritted teeth patience, but a kind of quiet, structural trust. It's not that this version of you doesn't care about the outcome. It's that your peace isn't hostage to it. You can want something with your whole chest and still not fall apart if it doesn't arrive on your schedule. That's the difference. Not the intensity of the want, but whether your peace has been staked on its arrival. This second kind of wanting draws things closer, and this isn't some mystical claim. It's observable in how people actually behave around each other. Someone who wants connection but doesn't need it desperately is far easier to be around, far easier to trust, far easier to move toward. Someone who wants an opportunity but isn't gripping it with white-knuckled desperation tends to interview better, negotiate better, and somehow keep finding new doors even when one closes, because they're not spending all their energy on panic. They have energy left over for actually noticing what's in front of them. If you're honest with yourself, you probably already know which kind of wanting you learned first, because most of us learned the frantic kind before we ever encountered the other. We were praised for effort that looked like anxious hustling. We were told that caring meant staying up late, worrying, meant checking constantly, meant never relaxing until the outcome was secured. Nobody sat us down and said there was another option, a wanting that could be just as real, just as committed, but rooted in trust instead of fear. The good news is that this isn't fixed. The pattern you learned first isn't the only pattern available to you. It takes practice, and it takes noticing. Noticing when your wanting has slipped into the frantic, hole-shaped version, and gently, without self-judgment, choosing to loosen the grip. Not forcing yourself into fake calm, but recognizing, over and over, that your peace was never actually dependent on the outcome arriving on your timeline. Every time you notice this and choose the sunlight instead of the hole, the second kind of wanting gets a little more familiar, a little more accessible, until eventually it starts to feel like your natural way of moving toward things, rather than something you have to talk yourself into every single time. Why letting go isn't giving up. People hear let go and think it means stop caring, stop trying, lie down and accept whatever comes. That's not it. And honestly, that confusion has kept a lot of people stuck because they tried not caring as a strategy, felt it fail, and concluded the whole idea was nonsense. Letting go isn't giving up on the outcome, it's giving up on controlling the timeline. It's the difference between planting a seed and then digging it up every day to check the roots, versus planting it and actually letting the dark soil do what dark soil does. The digging doesn't help the seed. It only proves how afraid you are that it won't grow. And every time you dig, you set it back further. Most people call this patience, but it's deeper than patience. Patience still has gritted teeth in it. This is closer to trust. Not trust that everything you want will come exactly how you pictured it, but trust that your gripping was never actually the thing making it happen in the first place. Let's clear up the confusion first, because it's a real and understandable one. Somewhere along the way, letting go got mixed up with apathy. People heard it and thought it meant pretending not to care, forcing themselves into a kind of numb indifference, hoping that if they acted like they didn't want something badly enough, life would somehow reward the performance. And when that performance inevitably failed, because it was never real, just a mask over the same old desperate wanting underneath, people concluded that the whole idea of letting go was a lie, something that sounds nice in a quote, but doesn't actually work in real life. But that was never what letting go meant. Letting go has nothing to do with pretending you don't want something. You can want something with your entire being and still let go, because what you're letting go of isn't the desire, it's the demand that it happen exactly when and how you've decided it should. That distinction changes everything. Think about the seed metaphor for a moment, because it captures this so precisely. When you plant a seed, you do the work required. You choose good soil, you water it, you give it what it needs. But after that, there is nothing more that direct action can do. The seed does its own work, underground, in the dark, on its own timeline, following a process that has nothing to do with how anxiously you watch it. Now imagine someone who plants that seed, and then, because they're so afraid it won't grow, digs it up every single day to check on the roots. From the outside, this might look like devotion. Look how much they care. Look how closely they're watching over it. But anyone who has ever grown anything knows this behavior doesn't help the seed. It actively damages it. Every time the roots are disturbed, the plant has to spend energy recovering from the disturbance instead of using that energy to grow. The very act meant to protect the seed is the thing setting it back. This is exactly what constant worrying, checking, and controlling does to the things we want in life. You do the initial work, you put in the effort, you plant the seed, and then, instead of trusting the process to unfold, you dig it up constantly, through anxious thought, through checking for signs, through trying to control every variable in the timeline. And just like the seed, the thing you're hoping will grow gets disturbed over and over, never given the uninterrupted space it needs to actually develop. This is why letting go isn't giving up. Giving up would mean not planting the seed at all, or abandoning it entirely once it's in the ground. Letting go means doing the planting, doing the watering, and then having the discipline, because it does take discipline, to stop digging, to trust the dark soil, to do what dark soil has always done, long before you arrived, and long after you're gone. Now, about the word patience, it's close to what's being described here, but not quite the same. Patience, as most people practice it, still has a kind of gritted teeth quality to it. It's often just suppressed impatience, wanting to dig, but forcing yourself not to, counting the days until you're allowed to check again. That's better than constant digging, but it's still rooted in the same anxious energy, just held slightly more in check. What's being pointed to here is something a layer deeper than that kind of patience. It's trust, and not the naive kind of trust that assumes everything will turn out exactly the way you pictured it. Life doesn't work that way, and pretending it does sets you up for disappointment. The trust being described here is different. It's trust that the gripping, the checking, the anxious digging, none of that was ever actually the mechanism making things happen. It was just fear, dressed up as diligence. Once you actually see this clearly, the compulsion to dig starts to loosen on its own. You don't have to force yourself to stop checking through sheer willpower, gritting your teeth the whole time. You start to genuinely see that the checking was never helping, was never speeding anything up, was never protecting the outcome. It was only ever soothing your own anxiety in the moment, at the cost of the very thing you were trying to protect. This doesn't mean you become passive. You still plant seeds, you still water them, tend to the soil, do what needs doing in the daylight, the part of the process that's actually within your control. But once the seed is in the ground, once the work that can be done has been done, there's a different kind of engagement required. Not digging, but tending the surface, staying present, doing the next right thing, and letting the underground part of the process happen in the dark, on its own time, exactly the way it always has, long before you learn to worry about it. The cost of constant noise. Look at how loud your own mind is on an average day. Notice how rarely there's a gap, a real gap, even 3 seconds, where you're not planning, replaying, comparing, or wanting. That noise has a cost, and it's not just stress. It's that noise drowns out the quiet signals that would actually guide you. Opportunities rarely arrive as loud announcements. They arrive as small, quiet nudges. A name that comes to mind, a door that's slightly open, a feeling that says, turn left instead of right. If your inner world is full of static, you will walk right past these nudges, because you were too busy shouting your own wants to hear anything answer back. This is why people who meditate, who walk quietly, who sit with nothing to do, often report that their lives start moving in better directions. Not because sitting quietly is magic, but because they finally cleared enough space to notice what was already trying to reach them. Try this honestly, right now, for just a few seconds. Try to find a gap in your thinking, a true gap, not a pause between one thought and the next, but an actual space with nothing running through it. Notice how hard that is. Notice how quickly another thought rushes in to fill it, usually before you've even finished noticing the gap existed. This is the ordinary condition of most people's minds, almost all day, almost every day, and most of us have never known anything different, so we don't even register it as noise. We just call it thinking, and assume it's simply what a mind does. But this constant noise has a real cost, and it's worth taking seriously, rather than treating it as harmless background chatter. The most obvious cost is exhaustion, a mind that never rests, even during moments that are supposed to be restful, burns through energy in a way that leaves you depleted, no matter how much sleep you get. But there's a subtler cost that matters even more for what we're exploring here. That constant noise drowns out signals that are far quieter than the noise itself, and so those signals never get the chance to be heard. Think about how opportunities and guidance actually tend to show up in real life, if you look closely. They rarely arrive as loud, unmistakable announcements. Life doesn't usually send you a neon sign. Instead, it sends small things. A name that unexpectedly pops into your head for no clear reason. a slight hesitation that tells you something isn't quite right about a decision you were about to make. A door that's been left slightly open that you'd have to actually stop and notice to walk through. These are subtle signals, quiet by nature, easy to miss even in the best of circumstances. Now imagine trying to hear a whisper in the middle of a crowded, noisy room. It doesn't matter how important the whisper is or how clearly it's being spoken. If the room is loud enough, you simply will not hear it. This is exactly what happens when your inner world is filled with constant static, planning, worrying, replaying, comparing, wanting. The whisper might be right there, trying to reach you, but the volume of your own noise makes it impossible to receive. This explains something that puzzles a lot of people: why some individuals seem to consistently make better decisions, seem to consistently find the right door at the right time, while others, working just as hard, somehow keep missing it. It's rarely a difference in intelligence or effort. Often, it's simply a difference in internal noise level. The person who has learned to quiet their mind, even briefly, even imperfectly, has created enough silence to actually notice the whisper when it arrives. The person whose mind never stops has the exact same whisper available to them, but it never gets through the noise. This is also why practices like meditation, quiet walks, or simply sitting with nothing to do so often correlate with people's lives seeming to shift in better directions. Not because these practices are mystical rituals with special power, but because they do one very practical thing extremely well. They lower the noise. When the noise drops even slightly, all those quiet signals that were always there, always trying to reach you, suddenly become audible again. It's not that quiet sitting attracts new guidance from nowhere. It's that it clears enough space for guidance that was already present to finally be heard. You don't need hours of silence to access this. Even small pockets of quiet, a few minutes without your phone, a walk without headphones, a moment of simply sitting and doing absolutely nothing, start to lower that background static enough to notice what's actually there. This isn't about achieving some permanent state of perfect inner silence, which isn't realistic for most people living ordinary lives with ordinary responsibilities. It's about creating enough small gaps, often enough, that the whispers get a chance to come through at all. The next time you find yourself endlessly turning something over in your mind, ask if this thinking is actually solving anything, or if it's just noise disguised as productivity. Often, the moment you notice the loop honestly, without judging yourself for having it, the volume drops slightly on its own, and in that slightly quieter space, you might notice something you'd been missing all along. Not because it just arrived, but because it had been trying to reach you the entire time, waiting patiently for enough silence to finally be heard. Becoming the space instead of the search. Here's the shift, and it's subtle, so stay with it. Instead of being someone who is searching for something, become someone who has room for something. Searching is active, restless, outward. Having room is a different posture entirely. It's inward, settled, open. A person who is searching walks into every room, scanning for what they're missing. A person who has made room simply exists, fully, in the room they're already in. And strangely, that's when things start finding them. This isn't about no longer wanting anything. It's about wanting from fullness instead of wanting from lack. It's the difference between a beggar asking for scraps and someone offering a seat at a table that already has enough on it. You cannot fake this shift with willpower. You cannot force yourself into feeling full, but you can start by simply noticing, without judgment, every time you catch yourself clutching, and in that noticing alone, something loosens. Awareness itself is the first crack of light into the closed hand. Let's look closely at what searching actually feels like. Because most people are so used to it, they don't even notice it as a distinct state anymore. Searching is scanning. It's walking into a room and, without even meaning to, cataloging everything that's missing, who isn't here, what hasn't happened yet, what still needs to be secured before you can finally relax. Searching treats the present moment as incomplete by default, as a placeholder for some better moment that hasn't arrived yet. And because it treats the present as incomplete, it can never actually rest in whatever is happening right now. Because right now is never the point. The point is always somewhere just ahead, just out of reach. Now contrast this with having room. Having room is a completely different posture, and it's worth really sitting with the difference rather than skimming past it. A person who has made room isn't scanning for what's missing. They're not treating this moment as a waiting room for some better moment. They're actually here, fully, in whatever this moment happens to be. Imperfect, incomplete by external standards maybe, but not treated as lacking from the inside. And it's precisely this quality, this settled presence, that seems to attract things in a way that frantic searching never does. Think about the last time you met someone who felt genuinely settled, not passive, not disengaged, but calm, in a way that had nothing to do with their circumstances being perfect. There was something magnetic about that calm, wasn't there? People are drawn to it, almost without knowing why. It's rare enough that it stands out. And it stands out precisely because most of us are used to being around people who are subtly scanning, subtly searching, even in the middle of a conversation, even while pretending to be fully present. This shift from searching to having room isn't about pretending you no longer want things. That would be dishonest, and dishonesty never actually leads anywhere good. It's about examining where the wanting is coming from. Wanting from lack says, I am incomplete without this, and so every pursuit becomes a kind of desperate patch job, trying to cover over a hole that the object itself was never actually capable of filling. Wanting from fullness says something entirely different. I am already enough, already whole, and this would simply be an addition to something that doesn't actually need it to be complete. The image of the beggar and the host captures this beautifully. A beggar asking for scraps is approaching from a position of lack, hoping to receive whatever might be offered, grateful for anything at all, because there's nothing else to fall back on. A host offering a seat at an already full table is approaching from an entirely different position, not because they have more money or more possessions necessarily, but because something inside them isn't operating from that same desperate scarcity. They can invite, they can offer, they can want more, without that wanting curdling into desperation, because their sense of enough was never actually dependent on this particular thing arriving. Here's the part that's important to say clearly, because it can be easily misunderstood. You cannot force this shift through sheer willpower. You cannot simply decide, right now, that you're going to feel full instead of lacking, the way you might decide to go for a run or eat something healthier. Willpower operates on behavior, but this shift is happening at a much deeper level, one that doesn't respond well to forceful demands. Trying to will yourself into feeling full often just creates a new layer of tension. Now you're anxious about not feeling full enough, which is just the same old pattern wearing a new disguise. What actually works, slowly and imperfectly, is noticing, simply noticing, without harsh judgment, every time you catch yourself clutching at an outcome, clutching at a conversation, clutching at a version of the future you've decided you need. You don't have to fix the clutching the moment you notice it. You don't have to force yourself into some instant state of peaceful fullness. You just notice. That's it. And in that noticing, something loosens on its own, without you having to manufacture the loosening through effort. This is because awareness itself has a quality that action doesn't. The moment you truly see something clearly, really see it, without immediately trying to change it. It naturally begins to shift. The way tension in your shoulders sometimes releases the instant you notice you've been holding it, even before you consciously try to relax. Awareness is the first crack of light into a closed hand, and over time, as that crack widens through repeated, patient noticing, the hand begins to open on its own. Not because you forced it open, but because it finally saw there was nothing left worth gripping so tightly. Here is the insight underneath everything we've said tonight, and it will sound almost too plain, but let it land anyway. You do not receive what you want by becoming someone who wants more skillfully. You receive it by becoming someone who needs it less. Not because you've given up caring, but because you've stopped needing the universe to hurry up and prove itself to you. The moment your peace stops depending on the outcome stops being able to hold your peace hostage. And in that exact moment, not before, never before, space opens. Not because you tricked the universe into liking you more, but because you finally stopped standing in your own doorway. That's it. That's the whole secret, hiding in plain sight the entire time. Not more effort, not more longing, just less clutching, more room. Let's sit with the first line for a moment, because it's easy to read past it too quickly. You do not receive what you want by becoming someone who wants more skillfully. Most of us have spent years, maybe our whole lives, trying to get better at wanting. We've read the books, tried the techniques, refined the way we visualize, sharpened the way we ask, adjusted the words we use when we pray, or hope, or set an intention. We treated wanting like a craft to be perfected, as if the reason the thing hadn't arrived yet was simply that we hadn't asked correctly enough, hadn't wanted it with the right technique, hadn't lined up the exact right combination of thought and feeling and action. And there's a strange comfort in that belief, even though it usually leads nowhere good. If the problem is technique, then at least the problem is solvable through more effort, more study, more refinement. You can always learn a better technique. You can always try harder, to visualize more vividly, to speak your desires more precisely, to align your emotions more perfectly with the outcome you're chasing. This belief keeps you busy. It keeps you feeling like you're doing something, but it also keeps you exactly where you've always been, because the actual mechanism was never about the sophistication of your wanting in the first place. Here's the plain truth underneath all of it. You receive what you want by becoming someone who needs it less. Not because you've stopped caring. That distinction matters enormously, and it's worth repeating so it doesn't get lost. This isn't an invitation to become indifferent, to convince yourself you don't actually want the thing, to perform a kind of hollow detachment that's really just suppression, wearing a peaceful mask. Needing something less doesn't mean caring about it less. It means your inner stability, your sense that you're okay, your capacity to feel at peace in this exact moment. None of that is any longer hostage to whether or not the thing shows up on schedule. Think about what needing something actually does to your nervous system, to your daily experience, to the quality of your attention. When you need something, every day becomes, in some quiet way, a referendum on whether you're closer to okay or further from it. Good news about the thing you want, and you feel a flood of relief, however temporary. Bad news, or even ambiguous news, and you feel your whole internal weather shift, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. Your peace becomes a hostage, and the outcome becomes the one holding the ransom note, deciding, seemingly at random, whether today you get to feel calm, or whether today you get to feel like the floor has dropped out again. This is an exhausting way to live, and most people don't even realize how exhausting it is, because they've never lived any other way. It becomes the normal weather of their inner life, this constant checking of the emotional barometer against the status of the thing they want. And what's cruel about it is that this exhausting state doesn't even help. It doesn't make the outcome arrive faster. It doesn't make you more persuasive, more attractive, more capable. If anything, as we've already explored, it tends to do the opposite. It broadcasts a kind of desperation that pushes away the very thing being chased. Now consider what happens the moment your peace stops depending on the outcome. Not because you've talked yourself out of wanting it, not because you've pretended it doesn't matter, but because you've genuinely arrived at a place where you know, in your bones, that you will be okay, whether or not this particular thing happens on this particular timeline. This is a completely different internal posture than the one most of us have practiced our entire lives, and it changes something fundamental about how you move through your days. When your peace no longer depends on the outcome loses its leverage over you. Think about what leverage actually means here. It means the outcome had the power to determine your emotional state, your sense of okayness, your capacity to be present and calm. The moment that leverage disappears, the outcome becomes just an outcome again. Something you'd still like to happen. Something you're still moving toward, but no longer something that holds your entire inner world hostage to its whims. And here's the part that sounds almost too simple to be believed, but which anyone who has actually experienced this shift will tell you is true. The moment that leverage disappears, the exact moment, not sometime vaguely in the future after you've done enough spiritual work, not after you've achieved some permanent state of enlightenment, but in that actual moment, when your peace stops needing the outcome to cooperate, something opens. Space appears. Not metaphorically, but in a way you can actually feel. Like a held breath, finally released. Like shoulders that didn't even know they were tense, finally dropping an inch. Why does this happen? Not because the universe suddenly notices you've become calm and decides to reward you for it, as if peace were a kind of currency you could spend to purchase outcomes. That would just be the same old transactional thinking, wearing new clothing. Do this practice, achieve this state, and the universe will pay you back with what you want. That's not what's being described here. The space opens for a much simpler and more grounded reason. You stopped standing in your own doorway. Think about that image carefully, because it's the whole teaching compressed into a single picture. Imagine a doorway, the very doorway through which the thing you want would have to pass in order to reach you. Now imagine that for years, without realizing it, you've been standing directly in that doorway yourself, blocking it, not because you're trying to keep the thing out, but because your own anxious presence, your own constant checking and rehearsing and gripping has taken up all the physical space where the thing would need to arrive. You weren't sabotaging yourself on purpose. You were simply so busy occupying the doorway with your own noise that there was nowhere left for anything to walk through. The moment your peace stops depending on the outcome, you step out of that doorway. Not because you forced yourself to move, but because there's no longer any reason to stand there so rigidly. If you don't need the outcome to secure your peace, you don't need to guard the doorway with the same desperate vigilance. You can simply exist, a little to the side, present, but no longer blocking. And it's precisely in that stepping aside that room finally appears for something to actually come through. This is why the line matters so much. Not because you tricked the universe into liking you more. There's no trick here. There's no secret password, no magic formula, no clever manipulation of cosmic forces that suddenly makes life favor you. The shift isn't external at all. It's entirely about what you stopped doing to yourself. You stopped blocking your own doorway. That's the whole mechanism, as plain and unglamorous as that sounds. It's worth pausing here to address something that might be nagging at you, because it nagged at a lot of people who first encounter this idea. Doesn't this sound like it could become an excuse for passivity? If needing something less is the key, why not just stop caring about anything and let life happen to you? This is a fair question, and the answer matters. Needing something less is not the same as caring about it less, and it's certainly not the same as taking no action toward it. You can still move toward what you want with full engagement, full effort, full presence. The difference is that your sense of being okay isn't riding on whether that effort produces the exact outcome you pictured, on the exact timeline you demanded. This is a subtle distinction, but it changes everything about how you actually live day to day. You still show up to the interview prepared and engaged. You still nurture the relationship with real attention and care. You still put in the work toward the goal you're moving toward. But underneath all of that action, there's no longer a desperate hum, insisting that your entire sense of okayness depends on how it turns out. That hum, more than anything else, was the very thing standing in the doorway. Consider how this plays out practically. Someone going into an important conversation, fully needing a particular response from the other person in order to feel at peace, tends to bring a kind of pressure into the room that the other person can sense, even if neither of them could name it directly. There's a subtle tightness, a subtle demand underneath the words, even if the words themselves sound calm. Now imagine the same conversation, same stakes, same desire for a good outcome, but this time, the person walking in already knows they'll be okay regardless of how it goes. Their words might be nearly identical, but something about the room feels different. There's room to breathe. There's room for the other person to respond honestly, instead of reacting to pressure. And ironically, this is usually when the better outcome actually becomes more likely. Not because peace is a manipulation tactic, but because peace removes the very static that was making genuine connection difficult in the first place. This is what's meant by space opening. It's not mystical. It's not asking you to believe in some grand cosmic reward system. It's describing something you can actually observe in your own life, in your own body, the moment you stop needing this particular moment to be different than it is. The tightness in your chest loosens. The constant internal narration quiets. And in that quiet, in that loosened space, things that were always trying to reach you, opportunities, insights, connections, finally have room to land, because you're no longer using all the available space to block them out with your own anxious noise. And this brings us to the final, plain truth, the one that's been hiding underneath everything said tonight, dressed up in different images and different metaphors, but always pointing at the same simple thing. Not more effort, not more longing, just less clutching, more room. It's almost disappointing how simple this is, isn't it? After all the searching, all the techniques, all the years spent trying to become better at wanting things, trying to perfect the craft of desire, trying to say the right words or think the right thoughts, or align with the right frequency, the actual answer was never about doing more of any of that. It was about doing less of the thing that was never actually helping in the first place. The clutching, the gripping, the standing rigidly in your own doorway, as if your vigilance was the only thing keeping the whole process moving. You can put this into practice starting today, not through some elaborate ritual, but through the same small, ordinary act described earlier, noticing. Noticing when you're clutching, noticing when your peace has quietly attached itself to an outcome that hasn't happened yet. Noticing when you're standing in your own doorway again, blocking the very thing you're hoping will arrive. Each time you notice, without harsh judgment, without another layer of anxious self-improvement demanding you fix it immediately, something loosens, just slightly. And slightly, repeated often enough, over enough days and enough moments, becomes an entirely different way of living. This is the quiet thunder promised earlier. Not loud, not dramatic, but the kind of insight that hits somewhere deep and stays there once it's truly understood. Not more effort, not more longing, just less clutching, more room. Everything else, the silence, the letting go, the noticing, the settling into fullness, instead of searching from lack. All of it was simply pointing toward this one, plain, unglamorous, endlessly practical truth. And now that you've heard it clearly, you get to decide, starting with your very next moment, whether you'll keep standing in your own doorway, or whether you'll finally step aside and let something in. Remember the room from the beginning of this video. You, standing there, hands full, waiting for something to be given to you. Look at your hands again. What if you set the box down? Not away from you, not abandoned, just set down, resting on the floor beside you, so your hands are finally free. Not empty, in the sense of nothing left. Empty in the sense of ready. This is what most people never learn, because no one ever taught them that receiving is not a more aggressive form of taking. Receiving is a kind of emptiness that has made peace with itself. It is the hand that stopped shaking long enough for something to actually be placed in it. You were never behind. You were never lacking enough desire. You were simply full of the wrong thing, full of grabbing, when what was needed all along was room. Make the room. The rest tends to find its own way in. If this spoke to something in you, subscribe, because there's more of this waiting for you.